Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today, sponsored by Interactive Brokers. It's Monday, October 21st, and we're live from the Investors Business Daily Studios in Los Angeles. And on the show today, we're going to be taking a look at Chipotle Mexican Grill that has earnings coming up, also network tester, Keysight Technologies, and finally another semiconductor stock, AMD, which has earnings coming up next week. But first, let's take a look at the major indexes. It's Justin Nielsen along with Ed Carson, and basically it looked like today we recouped a lot of the losses that we had Friday, kind of got back into that close to new high territory. Looks like the NASDAQ ended up 0.9%, S&P 500 about 0.7%, Russell 2000 was almost a full percent, and the Dow was the laggard today, only up 2%, so not 2%. 0.2%, very different there. Let's move the decimal. 0.2%, so not quite recovering, and a lot of that due to Boeing.
Yeah, so Boeing is not the best stock, for certainly in the Dow, but it's the biggest price weight in the Dow because it's a price weighted Dow, and Boeing is the highest price. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense because Apple clearly has a bigger market cap.
Right.
But that's the way it works with the Dow. But the NASDAQ, it basically came back and took back Friday's losses. So that's nice. As you can see, the major indexes still need to get above their September peaks and then a little bit further back their all-time highs in July. So that's a little resistance. I mean, the rally has shown it doesn't want to die, and it's above the 50-day line. Some breakouts are working, but it's also the rally hasn't really shown that it really wants to power higher either. I mean, we've got a lot of earnings coming up, so the next couple of weeks may be decisive one way or the other, or mini decisive. It's never over. It's a never-ending story, but it might provide some clarity in the near term which way the market is going to go.
And you can kind of see that when you're looking at the chart, and you look at those blue days and you look at the pink days, and it's almost like this back and forth. Okay, you do some hits, now I'll do some hits. And if anything, I think what we've been talking a lot about is that the market has been very resilient in the face of a lot of headlines. So it really doesn't want to give up that ground, but as you said, it's not like it's making much ground either. So we'll see what that holds. And as long as we can hold up above that 50-day moving average line and have some names that are setting up, which that's the big thing is we are seeing more of that. So let's take a look at some of those. We have Chipotle Mexican Grill. Now this is one that's been on our radar for quite a while, and it's really kind of their digital play that's kind of breathing new life into this company, right?
Yeah, digital play, because they're really behind on that. They were sort of like now they're catching up. And you combine the foodborne illnesses that they're still recovering from, the belated moves into digital, some new menu items, all of a sudden just powering ahead. I mean, this company is supposed to have 46% earnings growth in this quarter, and they've had similar kind of earnings growth for the last several quarters. And that's just tremendous for an established company. I mean,
right.
Company, it's one thing to be a small restaurant and you're expanding, like almost doubling your restaurants.
Which was what they did early in their cycle. It was like, oh, we're just making more stores,
Yeah, and you're just leveraging these huge margins. But now, yes, they're still expanding, but nothing like before, relative to the size of their base. So to deliver that kind of earnings growth in this kind of environment, the economy doing okay. You see all those other growth stocks, a lot of them, their earnings growth is slowing, and this is really tremendous growth. It's just about 1% below the buy point. One thing is definitely, you don't want to be buying ahead into it because you don't know what's going to happen. It surely looks good, but then that's a reason why maybe a lot of people are into this stock.
Yeah.
So, with this and some other stocks, you may want to, if earnings are coming up, if you want to get into it, maybe an option strategy where you sort of buy that and, you can limit your downside, but you can get most of the upside if it takes off.
Or you can just wait. And a lot of times earnings do act as a catalyst, and that's where you will see breakouts happen on earnings. And so that's another thing that you can do. You can just wait for the earnings to be over, see how it reacts, and act accordingly. Sometimes you're going to miss some, especially if you get that breakaway gap, but you're not going to be sitting through, potentially a downside
that's
risk.
right.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go ahead and move on to Keysight Technologies. And, a lot of times we talk about in certain industries where where you want to be kind of dealing with the picks and shovels of the gold rush as opposed to the gold rush itself, and that's kind of what Keysight Technologies seems like. It's the testing, network testing, and with 5G coming on, that's a big play for Keysight Technologies, right?
Yeah, they are. They're also an automotive technology, which that's continues more and more wires go into those cars.
Right.
And I mean, another thing is that they are. If China trade news, as that improves, that's important because they have a lot of exposure there. The Keysight, it broke out in pretty heavy volume. I mean, there was a couple other breakouts today. They really didn't end up doing that great, but this one was clearly the true breakout of the day. So that was nice action. It's a flat base on a weekly chart. It's sort of a base on base action, which we've seen a lot of.
Yeah.
Strong stocks, sort of showing that one little step, which can seem dull in a strong market, but in a choppy market can be impressive. So this was nice action. Then I don't think they have earnings for quite a while, so that's something. If you bought it, you don't have to worry about that coming right ahead.
Yeah, they have an October year end for their fiscal year, so yeah, you got some time on that. And as you said, it's one of those stocks where we've seen so many of the breakouts, and they either failed or they turned into handles or kind of some choppy action. But this is one that really held above that previous breakout and just kind of formed that flat base. So of course, this is one of the reasons why that blue line down below, that relative strength line, looks so great on this.
And one of the things is we also had Tempur Sealy, which did pull back somewhat today, but this was another one that's breaking out seemingly on no news, which is nice because it seemed for a while the only breakouts that were happening, they were coming on earnings, which is fine, but that's sort of like, well, you've gotten your good news. What's
now
next?
What?
Yeah. I mean, especially if the market's coming down, and you saw some breakouts, and then they would come back down because there was no news for day two.
Yeah, and I think this had an upgrade on Friday, but I didn't see anything on the wires today. And as you mentioned, that volume was pretty impressive, 59% above its average volume. So that's not, as Bill used to say, that's not your Aunt Sue down the street buying shares. So let's go ahead and move on into the semiconductor. This has been another industry that we've been watching a lot, and of course there's a lot of earnings coming up. AMD has earnings coming up next week, but tell us about what's going on with AMD right now.
Well, AMD was a leader early on. It was sort of like the only chip stock that was doing well. Then it sort of got a little sloppy, it was back and forth. It sort of had this weird action earlier. It fell back down, but it regained its 50-day line last week after basically touching its 200-day line on October 3rd when the market sort of bottomed out. So it's moving, it's starting to build the right side of a base. It's starting to be impressive again. We have Intel earnings coming out later this week. There's other chip earnings, but Intel being a rival, that'll be important. It's one of those situations where investors in AMD would probably be saying, well, I want to hear about good demand, but I want to hear that Intel's having some problems.
Right, exactly.
Which has actually been one reason why AMD has done well, is that Intel's had some problems developing its things. But, it's some nice action here. It's not there yet. I mean, it's like it's building up, and you want to set up, you want to see if that continues to go. Chip stocks are definitely a leading area. Basically, one of the big growth areas is working with software. We're terrible right now, honestly.
Right.
So this is impressive. Definitely one to watch coming on ahead.
And you can kind of see that there was an area of resistance right around where that 50-day line is, right around like 32. So a few weeks ago, it seems like it's clearing that area of resistance, but it still has that area up about 35, 55, where it needs to get to kind of get back into new high ground. Okay, that will do it for us today on stocks. A couple things just to keep in mind. We do have another investing strategies that will be dropping today. Of course, Ali was in New York at the NASDAQ for the investing strategies, and you can find that at investors.com/investing strategies. And also don't forget to follow us on our social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on Twitter, and you can engage with us on any of those social media platforms. But for today, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you back here tomorrow.